All right, everyone, welcome to our podcast episode here with Karl Taft. Karl is a good friend of mine, and we've been talking quite a bit lately about medical practices, pain physician practices, and how he can help and provide value. So, Karl, welcome on. Happy to have you. Go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your specialty and what you've been up to.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks, James. Appreciate you having me. Yeah, Karl Taft for your listeners. I'm a 25-year entrepreneur that got into the M&A space about 3 years ago. The firm I'm with does several hundred transactions a year, so we see a lot of different deal flow from multiple verticals, and it's been a blessing because there's lots of different ways to structure deals and buyer pools that you can go to that ultimately sellers or owners of companies can exit their company successfully, right? It doesn't have to be black and white. There are many ways to transact and exit your business.
25 years. That's a good experience there.
My hair's still pretty black, right? I'm not salt and peppered.
Dude,
Yeah,
you have all your hair, so
yeah. It's
you must be great at what
I
you do.
thank my I thank my Asian mother for that. Yes, sir.
Were you always interested in this line of work? You've been doing it for 25 years. You know, what did you do before that? Were you always interested in the business world, the transaction world?
Sure. So, master's in chemistry, MBA is my education, and but I grew up in family business. My dad had a construction company, and so my icebreaker used to be I'm the only Hawaiian you'll know or meet that doesn't know how to surf because I basically was slave labor for the family business, right? So all weekends, every day after school, like just always doing something to make payroll, generate revenue, right? So that was just my mindset. So when I went away to college and got my degrees, and I wanted to help people, and I explored taking a medical path. I explored environmentalism, and then ultimately settled on material science, just using my scientific kind of entrepreneurial creative brain. That was the one and only job I had working for an aerospace company straight out of college. And then I started a business, and it was one exit or one success after another. I mean, I've taken a company public via the IPO route, 100-hour weeks, 10 years, the sacrifices that are involved in that. It was a quote unquote successful exit, but the successful exit, came in the form of stock, but I was asked to resign, and that really weighed on me mentally. My father's business, same thing. I was heir apparent. I'm the only child. I was supposed to take over that business. When I didn't take over that business, he just wound it down and shut it down, right? And then that was, an exit that he could have achieved. And then I've had other people, friends, colleagues in the space that I've watched over the years not really know that there was a path to success. And I didn't really think much about it at the time, but at some point, I was exiting my last business, which was in logistics. And I had a great deal on the table. And my business partner and dear friend just said, I don't want to do this deal, Karl. And he chalked it up to he didn't know what he wanted to do after he sold the business, right? So we talk a lot, and I'm sure we're going to talk in this podcast about mechanics and things to think about. But one of the most important things you can think about is what's next,
Mm,
right? Like if you don't know what's next, it's likely that you will not transact because a business is so, in many cases, so emotionally linked to self of a small business owner that it's hard to imagine life after a transaction, right? So if you can imagine that and what that takes, and you know what it's worth or what you want out of it, and you check those two big boxes, which I think are big, then you're better prepared for that exit. I mean, I watched my father do it. I mean, it happened to me when I was asked to resign. It should have been the best thing ever. I was miserable. I started another business in 2 weeks because I didn't know what I was going to do, right? So, and I think a lot of it, for your listeners out there, one thing to consider too is there's an exit by design, right? We orchestrate and create an optimum exit. It doesn't mean that you have to hit the eject button and exit tomorrow. It just means that you're prepared for the exit because so many times we see in our firm with our clients, many of them are coming to us because it's an exit by circumstance, health, divorce, new job for the spouse somewhere else, and they're like, gotta sell now. And there's no timing for that. And we can sell a lot of businesses out there, but the best asset that I think all owners will have in their corner is time. When you have time to prepare, when you have time to pick the right owner, when you have time to, just figure out how to transition in a way that adheres the highest value for the new owner, that's where you get the most value for yourself, right? So that's what I'm touting to a lot of clients. Now, that's not a luxury that everybody has, but in my world, if I could wave my magic wand and have every business owner out there think about one thing, it's prepare early. It's not I mean, it's death and taxes. It's an exit, a business exit will happen. It's just a function of when.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of good insights there. And business owners, they don't know all of those things, right? They don't know to prepare, to know what's ahead or know what's next after after they leave their business. So, um, talking about the medical space, our audience is, they have medical clinics, they have pain management clinics with multiple locations, med spas, longevity clinics. It, I'm sure it's the same with this industry. When should a physician or a practice actually start thinking about their exit strategy? Like when would be a good time for them to start, thinking about that?
Sure, sure. I think, well, there's two parts to that. I think you should always think with the end in mind, right? That, at some point, and when you think about the end in mind, that can also dovetail into more time in the business, right? If you're planning on building a good business, which is attractive to many buyers, what can come out of that is a business that's easier to run, more predictable, cash flows better, right? And then for the proprietor or the owner, they might want to stay in it longer. But just straight answer to your question, I'd say 3 to 5 years is a really good over under number for an owner that's thinking that they might sell. Maybe they're 55 and they're thinking 60, or it's 60 and it's 65, or it's frankly 35 and they want to sell by the time they're 40 because of whatever reason. But 5 years is a really good amount of time to give yourself. It lets you address operations, clean up financials, and maybe systematize sales, which are, in my mind, three big buckets that dive into or affect valuations of practices or any business for that matter.
Gotcha. Okay. And what type of what are the biggest mistakes you see practice owners make when they wait too long? To,
Sure, sure. That's a great question. Um, so we touched on one, which is reactive selling, right? Or exits by circumstance, right? Health scare, burnouts, unsolicited offers, right? They might force a decision. And if you're not prepared for it, or if you haven't ever worked on your business and its value, you're going to be selling at a discount. Um, Ignoring tax and deal structure implications could be another one, right? Until it's too late. I'm not an accountant for your listeners, but there are things that you can do and put in place ahead of time that help transactions be, put more dollars in your pocket at close. Because, I mean, we've seen where a $7 million offer and a $3 million offer, yeah, are greatly different in terms of top line offer, but the $3 million offer might put more money in your pocket day one. And so you might look at it a little differently, right? So just things to think about there. Um, Another mistake is not knowing what the practice is actually worth or business is actually worth, right? If it's worth 1 million, 10 million, or 100 million, your actions might change based on the value of your business, right? So just knowing what the business is worth and how the market is valuing that business and the types of things that the market is going to look at to value it and maybe ask of you as the owner pre and post transaction would be things that I would think about. Oh, and the last thing, most important thing, many business owners operate their business and they're good operators, but when it comes time to file their taxes, the mindset is minimize tax. There's a lot of maybe commingling of personal and business financials. Having that clearly defined and delineated is important, both from a bank, if a lender is going to be involved, and the buyers. So just being able to explain that the car expense is really not a business expense and it's laid out in a certain way, and then understanding if the bank is going to actually give you credit for that, or ultimately the buyer is going to give you credit for that, will let you know maybe how to operate the business a couple of years out, right? Because if you know, for instance, the bank is not going to assume that your Escalade of $2,000 payment a month is actually a business expense versus a personal expense. It might just be good for an owner that knows that they're 3 to 5 years out to just remove that expense from the business, and then the business is ultimately making $2,000 a month more in profit that everybody will value.
So you're talking about valuations, right? And that's the first thing a clinic owner should do is make sure they have a good understanding of the value of their business. So you would do a valuation first for the business?
Every owner should understand what their number is, and absolutely, it comes to value. Once you understand the value and the equation that's driving that value, right? And the equation can be not only cash flow, but it can be operations, it could be type of payers, it could be the facility, it could be maybe compliance risk, it could be growth. All these other things go into the value of the business, and for an owner to understand that, it just lets that have it in the back pocket. Because a lot of times when I'm talking to business owners, like at an event or something like that, and we ask people, or the audience, how many of you have ever had a dispute with your partner and wanted to sell? How many of you have had an LOI walk through the door, right? An unsolicited offer walk through the door? I'd say a lot, if not a majority of the room is raising their hands. So the only way to know if that's a good offer or if it's the right time is understanding what your value is today.
Do you see business owners who start to think about exiting um, and they haven't gotten a valuation yet? I mean,
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons that I think deals blow up. They don't always blow up. Sometimes it's a good thing. Somebody says, "Hey, my business is worth $2 million," and maybe the advisor gives them a market valuation analysis, an MVA, and says, I think it's worth 3.5 million, right? That's a good day for the buyer, right? They're like, holy cow, or the seller rather. That's a good day for them. They're like, holy cow, I thought I was going to get 2, maybe I'm now going to get 3.5. But it can go the other way, right? My friend said, so and so told me, my accountant told me, my legal has told me my business is worth X, and then they go to market and we're like, no, it's actually half of that. And then that becomes a challenge, right? And for your audience, any good advisor out there that likes to play the long game is going to give an owner an indication of their value, and many times it costs nothing, because we in our business want to establish good relationships with good business owners, and we all recognize that it's a 3 to 5 year game, and this is the first step in that process.
right. So, do you think it would be a good idea for a clinic owner or somebody who owns a practice with multiple locations to get a valuation even before they want to start exit planning?
100%. 100%. And even maybe in addition to that, brief conversation about, what do you care about? Like, do you care about Susie or your back office staff? Do you care about, the other providers in the practice? Or do you just care about the dollar amount? And I would challenge your listeners. Some of them might be thinking, oh no, it's dollars. Right? I just need my number, and maybe so, but I can tell you that most of the owners that I talk to a year after they've sold, dollars is never brought up. How are they treating my staff? How they, what's the culture like? Those things will matter, right? And I'm not saying that money and the valuation of the business isn't important. I'm just saying that it's one piece of a broader set of things to consider when you're selling your business, right? Think of it: strategic, other doctors, private equity, family office, right? Those are all different types of buyer groups, and they act generally in different ways. And even within each group, there's different cultures for each of them. So it's something to be considered, and just talking to people that, have done transactions and can maybe steer that direction, or steer the strategic direction when it's 3 to 5 years out again, could be a good thing, right? Because you don't want to get it in your head that, oh, it's just X, Y, and Z, and that's all I care about. People in my space, the good ones anyways, will give owners a sense of what are some of the other things to think about and consider, because we want it to be successful. And you spend your whole life potentially building a practice, building a business. You only have one shot to sell it. So be measured, right? Measure 3, 4, 10 times, cut once.
Right, right. Good. Well, on that subject, what are a few things that actually determine how much a medical practice is worth? That
Sure.
that an owner can start to look at and say, just give them an idea of some of the things that drive those levers of what buyers might be looking for, and how you can help them uh, value their practice.
Sure. Well, some of the factors that will go into medical practice, I mean, the easiest and maybe most obvious would be EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation, right? It's a measure of profitability. In some cases, we might do seller's discretionary earnings, or SDE, but basically, there's a measure of profitability. That's one component of value. The other component of value is going to be the multiple. So you hear it all the time in industry, right? It's sold at a 5 multiple, a 10. Those multiples vary greatly based on a lot of factors. Type of business, of course, being one of them. But as it pertains to medical practices, right, there's lots of things that go into it. It could be growth trajectory, right? Is the business going up, flat, down? Is it rocky from year to year, right? Like those will give a buyer pause, right? I think your audience probably understand.
Mhm.
Owner dependency is another one. How dependent is the practice on the owner, and what's the role of the owner, right? If they're burning it 100-hour weeks like I did in previous businesses, that's not a very attractive story for a buyer potentially, right?
Right.
Provider and staff depth would be another one. Let's see, what else would there be? Payer contracts and rates relative to markets. What does that look like? The facility, the equipment, and the lease terms. Do they have a 10-year lease? Is the lease below market, at market, above market? Or does the lease expire next year, as an example? Many owners I run into sometimes think that, oh, my lease is almost up, it's time to sell. That actually is, in my world, not the case. I'd rather sell when there's 3, 4, 5 years on the lease, because it gives the new buyer a sense that they have a place to operate out of.
Gives them more security to.
Yeah, I mean, I've had deals fall apart because there's 6 months on the lease and the landlord refuses to give the buyer a new lease,
Mm,
right? So now what? You don't have a business anymore, right? Or if you have 3 months or 3 years on your lease and you come in, now the landlord, they will assign, there's usually an assignability clause in a lease, so they'll assign the lease to the new buyer, assuming they're approved. And I think in this field that many of the buyers would qualify for that.
and that's probably something that business owners don't really think about in their mind.
Yeah, they think a good time. I mean, not everybody, but many or some will think that, oh, it's when the lease expires that's the right time to sell. It's actually the opposite. It's when there's lots of time in the lease that's the right time to sell.
Interesting.
And unless, right, I guess that it could depend, unless the buyer has their own facilities, it's nearby, they could roll the operations into their facilities, right? And then they don't need that extra lease and that extra expense. But then a conversation inherently is going to come up as to, well, what's your walk-in traffic and how many people are we going to lose because we're not in that location anymore, we're in this location, right? And all that's going to come down to beating the original owner down on price or term.
Gotcha. Yeah. You also mentioned one thing that you look at when valuing a business is the practice's dependence on the owner.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit more of an idea of how much uh, that affects the valuation when the owner is, when it's dependent on the owner, or if the owner is heavily involved in everything?
Sure. Great. I mean, great question. I would say across many different industries, if it's you're dependent singly on one individual, buyers will have certain questions, right? So, I see it in certain industries like accountants where, the average age of an accountant is 56, right? So it's not unheard of to sell accounting practices where the proprietor is in their 70s, right? But think about that from the buyer's perspective. I've got to transition my clients and those relationships from that individual into my operations, right? And everybody knows James is the guy, right, that's running this business. So what's going to happen when I come in and I buy James's business? Are they going to trust me, or are they just going to go somewhere else? Because he is the face of the practice. He knows all these patients, he knows their kids. Man, what's going to happen, right? So that's an issue, right? It's not to say that that's not insurmountable. Let's say James is not in his 70s. James is in his 50s or 55, and he wants to go start gentleman farming somewhere. He just wants to change the pace, so he's going to sell his practice. But James is willing to stay on for 2 to 3 years and make sure the clients are transitioned in a way. It's going to give me lots of confidence as a buyer, right? That, okay, that transition is going to go smoothly, but now I need to think about, okay, well, the profits of the business, I still have to pay James something for his time. So what's the value of that business now, right? It's going to change. Yes, James made 700,000 last year as a single doctor office, but when I buy his office, I still got to pay James, and what's he willing to take? And now it's not 750 in terms of a benefit to the business. Maybe it's 400,000, as an example. So it's worth a different amount to me.
Right. Yeah. Interesting thing to think about. So doctors may have the opportunity to stay on for a few years after they sell their practice in some cases, especially if they're pretty involved in the businesses, pretty dependent on them, versus if everything is systemized, they have everything going without them, then they would need to stay on for a couple of years.
100%. Yeah, it'll be tied to collections, right? How good is the cash flow and the receivables, if you will, right? It'll be tied to the amount of time they're willing to spend, and then there'll be usually some trigger in the contract of for client attrition, right? A lot of the professional service businesses, whether it's engineering, accounting, medical fields, will have that type of structure in place because it's so relationship based, right? That, okay, when we do this transition, i.e., somebody buys your business, what happens? And so how that might look like for an accounting firm, let's say, is, okay, we're going to give you 80% of the business or the business value at closing, but there's going to be a promissory note, let's say, for the balance of the 20% over a certain period of time that's going to be tied to the number of clients or the amount of revenue that remains from your client base at some point, I don't know, 20 months down the road, 12 months down the road, right? So the buyer is more comfortable in that, yes, there will be attrition. I know this is a good business, but I don't know how good it is or how much clients will actually stay. So I'm going to put this 20% kind of float that's getting paid at the end based on that, or that's tied to that.
Gotcha. Um, I could ask you a whole bunch of more questions about that, but um, because it is something that I think a lot of business owners don't understand uh, as thoroughly as they could. How big is their involvement affect the valuation of the business and their offer? At the end of the day, so definitely something to think about for them. And then, what are some other red flags that can cause a buyer to lower their offer or to walk away from the deal completely that these practices should be aware of if they're thinking about going down this road in their future in the next 3, 5, 10 years? What are some red flags that would cause buyers to lower their offer?
Yeah, I mean, if there's risk in payment or some regulatory change that's coming down the pipe, right? Understanding that if there's judgments or suits that the business is dealing with because of something, right? They don't. A new buyer will look at that and say that there's risk 2, 3, 4 years down the road as to what that looks like, right? So that might give them pause. Um, what else could it be? I mean, depending on how work is coming to them, right? So if work is primarily referral based or reputation based on the one physician that's there, right? Or physicians, there's just going to be some analysis and consideration based on, how work or revenue gets to the clinic and who's responsible for that, and how much does that change between what's happening now to what happens 6 months after the business changes hands.
Gotcha. And I know there's a lot going on with private equity in the medical space right now. Could you give us an idea of the role that private equity plays in medical practice acquisitions, and what should physicians understand before considering an offer from a private equity firm?
That's a great question, and we see it a lot in different verticals, different industries. What I'm trying to say, um, private equity in general, for your listeners, plays what I call the arbitrage game, right? And so what I mean by that is we talked about value being primarily made up of two components. One, the measure of profitability, EBITDA, SDE, net income, etc., and then the multiple that gets multiplied by that. Okay, but what we didn't talk about is something called that I like to call the plateaus of profitability, meaning that a business that makes, let's say, $50,000 in profitability, 500,000 in profitability, 5 million in profitability, they're not all the same multiple, right? The one at 50,000 might trade at 1. The one at 500,000 might trade at 3. The one at 5 million might trade at 10. So that multiple is almost more important to the value of the business than the actual profitability of the business, right? And what private equity does is they aggregate, right, a bunch of smaller businesses, but then collectively that measure of profitability increases, right? So they can afford to pay, and back to my example of 500,000 being worth 3, private equity might offer 4, because they know when they put that 500,000 in their aggregate of businesses, it's going to be worth 10. So they're willing to pay 4, right? But is that's just one thing to think about, right? So private equity can pay a lot, and a lot of business owners that I talk to are talking about, oh, the PE guy that would pay X, Y, and Z. That's fine, right? You should consider that. But if consideration to staff matters, there's something to be said about thinking about what happens to your office manager that's been there for 20 years. What happens to this person that's been there for 5 or whatever. And if, right, if you think about it as you're a wholly operated clinic by yourself, but then you roll up into a larger, broader clinic with, all the bells and whistles and a very sophisticated back office. Do you need your receptionist? Do you need your bookkeeper? Or is that all going to be dissolved in the effort to put more profitability in that little business that's, you would get 3x, but they're going to get 10x for, right? So, hey, if I fire somebody and they're making $80,000 a year because I can already run it with the operations I have in place, that's potentially $800,000 in value on my 10x example, right? It's not
Right.
going to take long for somebody to be like, yeah, we'll make that decision, right? And if that matters to you, right? And here's where it comes down to value, but then also thinking about what an ideal exit looks like for you and what do you want to do, right? Because I talk to many strategic buyers in spaces, and the first thing out of their mouth is, are you running bid auction? Meaning, are you going to private equities and kind of chumming the water to get the best offer to come through? Now, that's a very good strategic buyer, and they're asking that question to us as the broker, right? We're helping the seller sell. And the reason they're asking that is they don't have the M&A muscle in many cases to compete against private equity. So if you're going to market and you're going to go that route, right, and we're going to chum the water, and a really good, strategic fit comes down the pathway, and they say, man, how are you operating your sales process? And if we say, oh, we're bid auction, we're going to have very tight deadlines on when you give us an indication of intent, a letter of intent, et cetera, et cetera, those guys will say, thank you very much, we're not interested, right? And so, and I'm not to say that that's a bad decision or a good decision. It's just a decision. And if that decision resonates with you as somebody you want to sell to, you might want to think about, how you're marketing and, that process, right? So private equity is great. I mean, it has its day, right? But make no mistake, we're trying to create arbitrage value by gobbling up a bunch of small businesses, cutting expenses, and then getting the pop on that equity. Now, and even in private equity, right, they're growing a business, they're exiting because they have equity holders, right? And they need to make their investors whole. So, hey, we're doing this strategy, we make a certain amount, oh, we got enough, we sell, and then they do what's called a recap. So they're going to recapitalize the business. When for many listeners out there, it can be very lucrative, right? If you recap might look like you're getting 70% of the cash at closing for the value of your business, but you're going to get 30% in rolled equity for the parent. And as the parent grows and ultimately exits, it's creating value. And so the second check you might get for the 30% could be bigger than the first check for your 70% cash. So it can be great, right? But things to ask yourself is that, does it have the right cultural fit? What's going to happen to my staff? Do I have to be involved? What's the recapitalization timeline look like? Did we just open the fund, or is the fund about to change in 18 months, right? That timing of when that fund maybe switches hands and recaps can also give an owner some indication as to how real that 30% might turn into actual dollars for them, right? So they're just things
Right.
to ask.
Right.
Um, and then, of course, all maybe the structures in the agreements about clawbacks and risk, and we're going to give you X amount for your business, but then there's all these levers and knobs that can be pulled and turned to lower your price based on things like patient attrition.
Patient attrition. Gotcha. Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on there, with the private equity, and they're buying up a lot of practices. So,
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
said earlier, every business is going to eventually have to exit. So,
it's
you
correct.
know,
Absolutely, and understanding what those options look like and timing of, right, can
right,
matter. And again, private equity is a great tool. I mean, it's a great tool. You just have to understand the risks, right? It's like a hippopotamus, right? They're cool to look at in safari. They're great. How's this huge animal stay underwater for so long? It's awesome. Look at it. Don't get too close. right? You're going to
Right.
get trampled, right?
Yeah.
So, but just PE is no different.
So why would a physician want to use an M&A advisor or a business broker instead of trying to sell the practice themselves?
Sure. I guides in a journey. I mean, I can't speak for every business owner out there and every M&A shop that's out there, right? But or M&A advisor shop out there. But what we do see a lot of, or I see a lot of, is a business owner that comes to us and they say, "Hey, I got an LOI in hand now, and now I need your help." Right? Um, there's a few different reasons why somebody would want to use an M&A advisor, but at a minimum, an owner should have and understand, like, do you have a good financial advisor? Do you have a good accountant? Do you have a good attorney or access to a deal attorney? Like those, regardless of an M&A advisor, if you're going to transact at a certain size, you should know people that are good and that you trust. um, M&A advisors, I would say, are valuable in that they see a lot of transactions and they understand how things should look, right? It's
Right.
not just a pricing thing, it's a structure thing, right? And when there's certain things, for instance, that we think, hey, the buyer is double dipping on a couple of things, or hey, that's not market, right? And we can provide that. And at the same time, we're a voice of reason, right? Like the interaction between buyer and seller is almost like I don't have a good analogy for this. It starts really exciting. Oh wow, this is gonna be great. This is good. But as time goes on and we start checking the boxes and being very structured and walking towards an ultimate transaction, it almost things start to waver a little bit, right? The honeymoon ends and then it's tactical and then, hey
Mhm.
James, why are you asking me for X, Y, and Z? And hey Carl, why are you pushing back on this term that I think is so standard? That's where an M&A advisor can really provide value, right? Because they're in the middle of that. And especially in a business like a physician's clinic, where there's a lot of customer operator interaction, but more so post transaction, there's probably going to be a lot of physician, broader physician group interaction, right? We don't want to erode that relationship
Mhm.
prematurely because it's most likely that a physician's going to have to spend 1 to 3 years to transition out of the business ultimately, if that's what they want to do.
Mhm. And you can help them get in a position where they have multiple buyers as well, right?
100%. I mean, that's ultimately the goal, right? And I'm not necessarily referring to the private equity bid auction that I mentioned earlier, where we're going to blast out 200 one-page teasers and try and get a bunch of NDAs. We might be very strategic, and it all depends on the client, right? So the client might say, no, I really value culture and I'm thinking about these things. So we might present them with a list and say, well, here's 100. What do you think about them? And they say, oh, yes, 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 no, no, maybe, maybe, I don't know, right? And we'll compile that and then we'll very strategically go out after multiple individuals to gauge their interest, have those conversations, and try to put a few offers in front of the owner because you know the market doesn't care, Mr. and Mrs. Physician, that you think your practice is worth $5 million, right? The market's going to tell you what that practice is worth, right? And so having a few things to look at can also be sobering, but at the same time reassuring and potentially even exciting to see multiple offers come in at whatever that number is.
Right. And it's better to have somebody in your corner who can help you navigate the whole thing. And like we talked about earlier, raise your valuation as much as you can with all the different things that you mentioned and the things that you're thinking about after the exit as well.
Yeah, yeah, we're guides to the journey, right? And the journey is not always a fun journey, right? With crystal flutes filled with champagne. Sometimes we got to walk through the mud on that journey, right, to get to the end. But knowing and having somebody in your corner that says, This is normal. This is how it's supposed to feel. We understand. Let's keep going, right? Can be very reassuring.
I mean, you're only going to exit how many times in your business, right? Like,
That's right. That's
you,
right.
you want to do it the right way. I would think you'd want to cover all the bases, do everything the right way so that you don't look back, you don't have regrets, you know?
Correct. Correct. And we implore all of our clients, right? Talk to as many people in the M&A space as you want to. Please do that, right? You should. Just like when you're starting a business, you should talk to 20 people or so in and around the business to learn more. When you think you're ready to, start thinking about an exit, hopefully years in advance, talk to many different M&A advisors, right? It's anybody, right? Anybody can show really well on the first date or for the first 30 minutes of the first date, right? You want enough reps and FaceTime with somebody to understand, okay, does this person really know this structure? Did they really work on our industry? Did they come recommended? Can I talk to potential client that they've actually helped? Like those are all things that should come out, I think, in your listeners, processes as they go through this, right? Because nobody should just take anybody's word, mine or anybody else's for that matter, at face value.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you've given us a lot of really great information. I've got one more question for you. Um, let's say if a 45 to 50-year-old physician came to you today and said, I probably want to sell my practice in 10 years, what would you tell them to start doing right now?
One thing I'd want to understand is their business. And so it would be a little bit of a back and forth process, right? They're 10 years out, right? So great, we have the luxury of time, right? But I would want them to start thinking about their financials in a certain way, having a bookkeeper, whether that's internal, external, that you know and trust and is doing things the right way would be key. But then maybe more than the tactical stuff of cleaning up your financials, having redundancies in the layers of your business operations from personal standpoint or other, but also, understanding in your space, what you like to do and where the highest value is coming from, right? Because if you have 10 years to do something, right, and you like it and you're willing to do it, and it's actually worth more than maybe the suite of services that you're providing now, I think that's valuable information, right? And it might change your decision, right? Think of it, we're in Texas, right? Think of it like HVAC, right? Are we doing new construction? Are we doing residential, commercial? Are we doing maintenance? What territories are we doing? How is our marketing spend? How are our customers coming to us? And what's the cost of the customer and total acquisition or total value of lifetime of customer? Like if the sellers understand that or owners understand that, and then they know how that ties into the value that ultimately flushes through their business. I'm not saying it will change their strategic direction, but it certainly could influence it.
Yeah, start thinking about it early.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Well, Carl, I appreciate you coming on and helping us all understand a little bit more about this world and everything that you do to help these owners prepare for a successful exit. And thank you again for coming on. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience? Anything at all on your mind that you'd like to share, or any places where they can find you?
Sure. Your listeners can. Thank you, James. Your listeners can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure you can leave my email and number in the notes for them. I'm happy to arm people with the information. Everybody should understand what the rocky points on the horizon look like and where the safe harbors are as it pertains to their business exit.
Very cool. Well, I hope we can have another episode and chat a little bit more about some of this stuff in the future. I think it was a lot of really good information. information that people need to know, they want to know, and like you said, arms them with good information and good value. And so I'd love to have you back on and share a little bit more about some of the ways you can help in the future.
It would be my pleasure, sir. James, always a good one, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, Carl, thanks so much.